Welcome to the Carter Center's Forum on Human Rights. My name is Josh Griffin. I'm a graduate assistant with the Human Rights Program. I want to recognize and thank Aura Grimes, who's an intern with the Human Rights Program, also for all of her help and assistance in putting this roundtable together. I hope you all had a wonderful Juneteenth and took the time to reflect on how far this nation still has to go in its fight for social justice. If you'd like to participate in the live chat and ask questions to today's guests, you can do so by joining the Forum on Human Rights. All you need to do is complete the fields on the tabs below. Today, we are coming live from a cafe located in Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle, Washington. With me is Chelsey Richardson, a Seattle-based poet, educator, and mother. I want to thank both our live virtual audience, who you'll see shortly, and our audience too, that's turning in virtually. Thank you for joining today's conversation. It is through poetry that Chelsey has taken a stance in the fight for social justice. Her latest book, All Water Has Perfect Memory, gives the reader permission to grapple with the trauma we continue to experience and the joy we deserve to feel. In today's conversation, we'll explore the intersection of climate change, environmental justice, and systematic racism. These themes are beautifully illustrated in Chelsey's poem, Setting Suns as Bright as Wildfire. As the conversation unfolds, we permit you to grapple with understanding your role in the fight for social justice. Chelsey, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to start with a quote. This quote is by an Indigenous environmentalist by the name of Alanis Obamaswin. When the last tree is cut, the last fish is caught, and the last river is polluted, when to breathe air is sickening, you will realize too late that wealth is not in bank accounts and that you can't eat money. Scientists say we are at least 60% water. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. It is no wonder we are melting glaciers and setting suns as bright as wildfire across the Amazon and California and California and California. We are flooded with centuries of unfinished business. And if our ancestors are still dreaming, I believe they would not hesitate to invite us into their nightmares too. A fragile and wanting nightmare, like cracked teeth begging for a smile, like sheets of ice retreating in Antarctica and Greenland, screams escaping to the back of the throat like the ocean absorbing the earth's fever for the body to catch and hold. The Mississippi Basin's love affair with this dying climate. And wide like the volatile waves who swallowed your great mothers and fathers whole. The pale green reef that dressed their bodies and wrapped around necklines. But don't you remember the way the water does? The perfect memory eroding time. Precious arms and elbows flailing like tree arms in hurricanes. Chains and endless blue night sky rippling underwater. Tender twinkling stars drifting into their open eyes. Maybe Saturn or Jupiter waving across their drowning chests. How the moon wanted so bad to taste their black skin that it shoved itself into the bottom of the sea so that it could sit with them. Doesn't this water taste different now? Thick as blood, choking on bullets, like Tamir's 12-year-old lungs filling up to the brim of this earth's mouth, her kiss of death along shorelines. It is no wonder we are up to our necklines in debt. See, this water is unforgiving. It doesn't matter how much we refuse to reckon with our past, who loves it, or how much it is unloved. If it isn't nurtured, it will become fresh with poison. Did you think a pure white house and fresh reef-colored paper would protect you from flooding? We are all just a few degrees separate from someone's master, someone's slave, someone still waiting in this water, water curtsying to ward off demons, while this water is still rising, a fraction of a human still remembering. Thank you.
Thank you. Feel free to snap. Yeah. No, that was a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
What inspired that? What was that process to write a piece about climate change, about environmental justice, and systematic racism?
I think what inspired it most is just the reality that we are living on a climate that is dying.
Yeah.
And it's not so much about systematic racism as it is about our history in the United States, our history of slavery, our history of people refusing to recognize slavery and also refusing to recognize that climate change is happening.
Got you. Yeah, well, definitely. I think too, coming back to Seattle, having spent time in Atlanta, you see the various contexts of slavery and how it shows up in societies and how it is systemic throughout the country and how it not being recognized and understood through reparations and just the current passing of a holiday, but still can't get reparations is pretty interesting, to say the least. So I want to ask you a question written by Aura. One of the lines in this poem, the Mississippi Basin's love affair with the dying climate, is such an interesting way to describe the ongoing climate crisis and the effect it has on historical landmarks. Can you go more in depth about this line and why you chose to use this phrase?
So the thing about the Mississippi is that it is literally one of two ways to show that climate change, try to say this without crying, ways to show that climate change is actually happening. Because the Mississippi River is a place where they can track the amount of flooding, the amount of rainfall, and the huge storms that come about by the Mississippi actually passing over warmer water. Okay. And if it wasn't passing over warmer water, then we wouldn't see this uptick in storms, in loss of land due to flooding, obviously Katrina.
Yeah.
Like all of these things are actually a product of climate change, right?
Yeah.
The thing about the Mississippi is that it also creates revenue for, I believe it passes through more than 30 states.
Okay.
It is a place where we actually receive about 40% of our agricultural,
it's a lot.
in the U.S. And when we see this happening, it helps us to realize that in this place, we're seeing that we're losing our ability to actually feed ourselves.
When you say "our," who are you referring to?
All of us.
All Americans.
All of us, right? It's also a place that was used to transport slaves through the transatlantic slave trade. And to me, I just think it's a very interesting spot where why is it that all of this is happening here? What is it about our earth that is saying, pay attention, right?
Yeah.
So not only did we have slaves move through that area, but we also had slaves escape.
Definitely. And that's interesting too that you say that, because the Mississippi starts in the north and goes south, and the further south it goes, it seems like the more oppression it comes about, and you have a great migration to try to escape that oppression, but it still flows down.
Right.
Still oppressive.
Don't forget it flows up to here.
Yeah. No, it does. It flows everywhere, if we're going to be honest about it. But one thing that, I would like to know is, how did you come by this knowledge? It doesn't seem like, I imagine you just kind of came into it, you just knew all this information. What inspired you to seek out this knowledge so that, other people that are listening to this can kind of understand how they can go about that too, and have that same process, what they can be in the know?
Well, Google.
Okay.
It's great.
Google. Gotcha.
But Google obviously is what I use to search and seek out information. But I really enjoy studying ecology.
Okay.
I enjoy studying and learning about different aspects of climate change through the lens of different, news organizations, like shout out Democracy Now.
Okay. What do you like about them?
I really like the cutthroat honesty.
Okay.
I really like that what they do is reveal information that most mainstream news is not talking about. Like at the beginning of quarantine, they changed their name to at the beginning, somebody in the audience might actually remember it. At the beginning of each show, they say the War and Peace Report. That's what it is.
Okay.
But now they say the Quarantine and War and Peace Report.
Okay.
Right. But there's also Toni Morrison actually talks about the Mississippi. And lots of authors actually talk about the Mississippi. Lots of people who are ancestors of sharecroppers talk about the Mississippi. And mostly because of enslaved peoples, right, in our history and connectedness to the African diaspora.
Definitely. But
Toni Morrison is the person who made me want to explore it a little more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me more about Toni Morrison. I know that in your book you open with a quote.
Yeah.
Why'd you choose that quote?
Yeah. Okay.
And you want to read that?
Yeah,
please,
sure. I'll read it.
Please do.
Just so happen to open up.
Yeah. Convenience, y'all. All right, let's hear this.
So I used the quote as a title for my book, and it's so interesting because now we can consider her an ancestor, but while she was living, she was a teacher, right?
Okay.
And being raised by a teacher, I know this, right? And being a teacher, that your job as a teacher is actually to make people interested in learning. And so one of the things that's most difficult about reading some of her work is that she's forcing you to investigate and learn the entire time.
Gotcha.
So I like to think that I'm still learning, but that my book was more like an investigation of this idea of water and how it has perfect memory.
Okay.
So I used this quote in the beginning of my book. She says, they straightened out the Mississippi River in places to make room for horse and livable acreage. Occasionally the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use, but in fact it is not flooding, it is remembering. Remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Writers are like that, remembering where we were and the valley we ran through, what the banks were like, the light that was there, and the route back to our original place. It is emotional memory, what the nerves and skin remember, as well as how it appeared, and a rush of the imagination is our flooding. Toni Morrison.
That's beautiful. As I think about it, especially the back end, I think of the idea of place and how, certain people, marginalized folks, indigenous folks have a unique tie to place. And, capitalism commodifies resources in certain places, which breeds a disconnect to understanding place. And so in that context, how can the arts be used to assist capitalistic societies in reconditioning and redefining the relationship to place?
Ooh,
that's a big question, right? But I mean,
we got to
unpack that. We got time.
That last part of the question.
The last part. Okay. All right. So, how can art be used to assist capitalistic society? So, our society, America, the West, in reconditioning and redefining the relationship to place, the physical environment.
Okay.
So, how can we move away from commodifying place and resources to honoring, to respecting and protecting place?
Yes, I'm going to attempt to answer that question because I don't think that I have all of the answers, right?
Yeah.
What I do think that art can do is create a space to deliver a true and real narrative. And sometimes that can be from an imaginative place. And that could mean that I, with my art, imagine a place that looks like home, right? Actually, there's an artist from Seattle named Natasha Marin who has this book called Black Imagination.
Okay.
And what she does is she actually talks about Black people from an indigenous perspective, how we can explore and recreate the world that we live in. And so I think art helps us to move away from our understanding in this capitalistic way that it does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it also can change the narrative by just being honest and telling the truth. I don't know that we can really actually separate ourselves from all of it, because as I sit here, like I have Converse on my feet,
Definitely.
right?
Yeah.
I'm wearing, I don't know, CoverGirl or something silly like that.
Okay.
But I mean, I do believe that we can slowly move away from trying to understand. This is still the artist part of me, but I think that if you're true to your art, you're true to life, and you're honest about what's happening in life.
Yeah.
So I think that if we're really focusing on the truth, that we need to understand how disconnected we are from place as Indigenous peoples. We need to understand how disconnected we are from reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But we have to first, like, literally pull ourselves away from our phones that keep us obsessed with, like, looking and feeling a certain way. We have to retrain ourselves to go outside and see what's happening and experience the world. But then there are other things we can do actively too, like find out who your local farmers are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, find out where your products come from, how you purchase them, and be really thoughtful about those things. I don't know if that answers the question. Really, I'm attempting to.
No,
again, you hit me with a big
you had to. No, I appreciate that. I think definitely, absolutely agree with you there. It's just redefining and understanding where everything comes from, right? And really being intentional and knowing, what you do each day impacts people throughout the world.
Right.
What you buy, how you show up, what you choose to support doesn't just impact the local community, but also impacts the global community too. I think there's a lot there, a lot to be understood. And you said truth, and I don't fully remember what you were describing to, but what does that mean? Like
truth?
Yeah, when I don't exactly remember the context at one point.
Well, as we've talked before, like again, having a mother as a teacher, I grew up listening to like dope, amazing comedians who were really smart, had a comedic intellect. I grew up listening to jazz. I grew up listening and reading authors like James Baldwin. And James Baldwin, my mom really honored and loved and respected him. I didn't understand why. So I got older and started studying the art of writing and started reading more. And one of the things James Baldwin, I think he held himself too closely was being honest.
Yeah.
And I think that really just means, don't get wrapped up in ideas without actually understanding and investigating them first. And to me, I think as an artist, I have to try and seek out some truth if I'm gonna share something with the world.
Yeah. So now I'm getting back to what I was gonna ask you.
Okay.
Are you afraid of backlash that you might face when you speak your truth?
Always.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how does that not prevent you from still going out there and doing why do you continue then? If you know that you might face backlash and people might not agree with you, like what encourages you to still go out there and push back? So I think there's a lot of people out here that want to be you, want to speak their truth, but are afraid. So how would you what would you tell people that that are watching this to inspire them to go out there and say, you got to do it?
I think just continuing to check yourself. I have to check myself, and I have to have people who are willing to check me too, to hold me accountable to what is true and real to me. And I think that we have to, if I'm understanding the question correctly, you're basically asking me how can other people be true to themselves?
Yeah.
I don't know.
A lot more easier. I like to be complex and abstract, but I appreciate that. No, definitely. How can you be true to yourself? Yeah.
Man, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, and I don't think I do it perfectly all the time. And I think it's just a matter of just how can you live in your own body and not be true to who you are, you know? And I think you also have to be around people who aren't like you. And sometimes that means being around people who, I hate to say this out loud, but do actually have oppressive beliefs about you. Because sometimes those people help you to understand how to actually reveal more information to them and how to actually communicate with them better, and to continue to be honest. So, like, for example, my brother, who I love and adore, I actually debate with him all the time. We have really, really opposite political views. But then also to be around people who aren't like you. So I do not identify as queer. I do not identify as transgender, but I believe that I have to be closely linked to that community because I think that they are just as oppressed. I shouldn't say just as, they are oppressed in many, many ways. And we all have ways that capitalism tries to oppress us.
Sure. But there's intersectionality within that we can identify to be able to say that your oppression is similar to my oppression, and together we can fight against that.
Exactly.
Crenshaw, Kimberly Crenshaw, Intersectionality, check it out. Definitely. So we have some online questions that looks like. Let's go with, I think everyone has a creative side. What can you tell us of how to begin to explore the issues in a creative way? How do you get started?
I agree with that. I think everyone has a creative side too. I think that people just have to be willing to put themselves out there and to be willing to make mistakes. And to think about it as more of a practice than something that just comes naturally, because being creative is great. But also, for example, a thing like writing is something that you have to keep practicing and doing it over and over again to get good at it.
Definitely.
So I would say just don't be worried about making mistakes. Find something you like and then explore it and see if
Definitely.
you get better at it. If not, move on.
Move on. You heard it right here. Try it out. Doesn't work out. There's other things to do, I guess.
Hang on for a while.
Hang on
a couple of years.
Okay, got you. But then maybe it might be time to other avenues. So who are some artists / activists that you look up to? Do you actually consider yourself an activist?
I think I've been thinking about this a lot. So I think it just comes back to the truth thing, right? I personally look at people who I think are activists and I think, wow, I'll never be like that.
So what who though?
Like Nikita Oliver.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll never be. I look at her, them. I look at them and I think, wow, you are always actively working for the people, right? And you sacrifice yourself to do that. And I don't know if I have the same tenacity to continually sacrifice myself over and over again in the way that they do. I don't know that I could sacrifice myself in the way that Malcolm X did, or Angela Davis, or Assata Shakur, or the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
But I do not have trouble sacrificing my time and effort to young people and being around them. Right?
Definitely.
So I think that when I think about that, I don't mind calling myself, in quotes, activist.
Activist. Got you.
But I think the idea is, right, as an activist, you're supposed to kind of uplift information and share it. And I do think I do that to a certain extent. Obviously, in this poem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot there that you absolutely uplift and promote there. Let's move to another question from our online audience. The many references you made to the water, the earth, the solar systems, etc., were they metaphorical, literal, or both?
Both. Yeah, both and all that. So I'm thinking about the earth, for example. I think it could be seen as metaphorical and literal that the earth is our mother. But then there's also some truth to that. At what point do we not recognize that in some way, shape, or form we came from this earth? whether you believe that that's like a godly thing, right? Or that is like explains why we are made up of the same thing as the stars.
I mean, we literally are
Like,
stardust.
You were literally, and it sounds all ooh, but it's not.
Facts. I mean, the five most abundant elements in Earth or in the solar system are within us too.
Right. And so I think that in that sense, it's both literal and metaphorical. And then in thinking about like, I guess the water, it's the same idea. We're somewhere around 70% water. When do we not recognize that while we're destroying the water, we're destroying ourselves? We're polluting the water, making it undrinkable, and then we're also destroying the very elements that exist within us. It's this symbiotic relationship that we have with the earth. That we fail to recognize.
How do we recognize? Like, what is it going to take, do you think, for us to recognize, like these finite resources are finite, that these, water we need to sustain life? How do we recognize that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think, and sometimes I think that it takes policymakers to actually make changes for a larger percentage of people to realize that it's happening. But it also, we know that there are children, right, marching in streets. There are many indigenous children all over the world fighting for their communities and for their land to even exist. We know that people are literally blocking water from contamination. I don't know how much more we need, though. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's gonna make it finally click for most people.
So it seems like, how do we convince the policymakers to create policies that will protect our rights, so that
You want a real answer? Or do you want a diplomatic one?
No, I want your truth, right? Like Baldwin said, like provide me and our audience over here with your truth.
Well, I think realistically, we can't stop reminding them that that they're making huge mistakes by not reducing carbon emissions by, I think, 50% by like 2050. If we're not doing that, then we're going to be struggling for generations, obviously, and living in a hellish environment. I think that we have to make learning about the climate and understanding what's happening to the climate like integral part of the educational system in the same way that we need to challenge and force people to focus on like critical race theory.
No, I think that's a great answer. I definitely agree with you there. Another question coming in from the online. Feel free to continue to send those in too. Could you speak more to the unfinished business and our refusal to reckon with our past, and what hope could look like within the necessary work, especially for young people?
I'm glad the question is right there so that I can read it.
Yes, feel free.
Well, speaking about our unfinished business is pretty simple. There were treaties made with indigenous peoples in this country that I can speak to that were broken and are continually broken. And even in thinking about like burial grounds and ancestral grounds that are being threatened right now. And when I say indigenous, I mean that there are African peoples too that are trying to protect places where enslaved people were buried. And then where are our 40 acres and a mule? That is some real unfinished business. That was a promise that was promised to our ancestors, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with me requesting for land to be given to me or other indigenous people. It's actually our right.
That sounds like reparations.
It's definitely reparations.
Definitely. What are your thoughts then on the passage of Juneteenth and the lack of reparations?
I I was thinking about this a lot today. I was thinking about how if you have people who are, like if we use like an analogy, right? You have people who are begging for food. And they're begging for centuries. They're saying that their ancestors begged for food. And food is a basic right, you know? It's a basic...
It absolutely should be.
Right.
Yeah, it should be.
Should be a basic right. If you give those hungry people crumbs, are they then fed and satisfied and taken care of? The answer is no, right? No. And so I think that that's analogous to what actually happened with Juneteenth becoming a national holiday. So you can give Black people crumbs and say, here's a day for you to celebrate and get a day off, but you can't actually give us what we've been asking for centuries. And that is basic human rights. Rights to clean water, rights to safety, rights to healthcare. And this doesn't just apply to Indigenous Black people, it applies to all people, right? Definitely. So I think that the unfinished business is business that that all of us are probably due, but in thinking of reparations, most definitely Black people.
No, definitely. So when it comes to like these topics, reparations, you know, as a theme that you might want to write about, like, what does that process look like for you?
Okay, so any process in terms of writing something down usually starts with this simple idea. Okay. And then I write really horrible stuff. Really, really horrible things until I finally get my point across. Okay. But it also means that I'm doing a lot of investigating about the specific topic. So, for example, like when I decided to write about climate change, I wanted to understand where are signs of climate change, right? And it just so happened that the Mississippi Basin was a place. And it just so happened that in that case, also that I was thinking about ways in which African peoples have been affected by climate change and will continue to be affected by climate change, both in the States and the continent of Africa itself.
No, definitely. There's a lot. There's just a lot there, a lot to think about and to try to understand.
There is.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm in thought myself, you know, and just reflecting. I think that, you know, we don't do that enough, is really take the time to think and to reflect about our physical environment and how we can get involved, you know. And so I think for me is just, you know, how can we continue to use art to build community like this, right? How can we continue to use art to amplify these issues to a point that people can't not look away, right? And I think that's what, you know, I was zoned out there in a second. It's like, that's my thought process. It's like, how do we do that every day so that change happens? We don't have to worry about the policymakers, so that we can take it upon ourselves and be like a Nikita Oliver in a sense, or we just do this every day. And I don't have the answer to that. Do you have any insight?
And thinking about ways that we can use art to help amplify and ignite ideas that to change policy. That's a hard one, because I think that for the most part, art does get to the masses in a way that is commodified. You know, I was just listening to an interview. I was trying to get some inspiration. I was listening to an interview with Toni Morrison on the way here. And she was talking about jazz and how at that time jazz was music that came from young people, and that jazz was considered really horrible music. Okay. Because it came from young people. Yeah, of course. And so when I think about art today, maybe it's not specifically like my kind of art, but maybe it's actually still coming from young people. Like, you know, people who would be considered like mumble rappers that nobody wants to listen to. You know, maybe if people are actually start listening and paying attention to things that, like, those that people don't really want to listen to are saying, then maybe that will help create some change. But I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say how that works. Yeah. it's a really, really hard question.
Yeah, no, definitely. I don't know, but hopefully, in time we can figure it out. So I do want to recognize that right now we're in an area. Last year I wasn't here. Some of y'all might have been here. That this was CHOP, the Capitol Hill Occupy protest. And I have a question relating to that. So we're a block away from the East Precinct, the Seattle Police Department. As I mentioned, we're sitting in the area that was the Capitol Hill Occupy protest. So when you think back to last summer's racial reckoning and apply your line from your poem, we're all just a few degrees separate from someone's master, someone's slave. What has the city of Seattle done in a year to dismantle systemic racism?
I have seen nothing that I feel is actually sustainable. I mean, I don't know. I know that, like, for example, the mayor, Jenny Durkin, has a lot of language that she uses that actually that come out of ideas from critical race theory. But to me, as long as we're still living in a place that it just seems that it's getting more and more segregated, even if, let's say if we backtrack, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about your question, thinking about CHOP.
Yes. What was it like? I never saw it. Did you ever come out and
experience? I was here. Yeah.
Can you enlighten people that are watching? About, like, your thoughts on it and everything?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of mayhem, right? I mean, in the very beginning, when I was in the streets protesting with my daughter and then with friends who actually in the audience, what happened first was just peaceful protest.
Mm-hmm.
And then, being honest, maybe I'll be targeted for saying this, but the police incited violence on the people. They pepper sprayed and maced people. And that was just like the very first day of marching. That was before it even became CHOP, right?
Okay.
And then as people decided to stay and actually came to this area and tried to block the precinct and protest, there were a couple of really key and important things that happened that were not reported.
Okay.
One of them was that the police threw a flash bomb at someone's chest.
Oh, wow.
When they threw a flash bomb at her chest, the police had already agreed and said that they would not be coming in to help people because people were protesting against them.
Okay.
So there just happened to be nurses who had tents and offered first aid to that person. If they hadn't been there, that person would have died.
Sounds like Bloody Sunday down in Alabama and Selma when they walked across the bridge.
Right.
What you described in that.
Yeah. And that same day, someone was shot.
Oh.
But that someone was actually shot by, we're not really sure.
Okay.
Right? On that day, the police decided, without permission from the chief of police, to just abandon the area.
Okay. And we're literally a block away from the police precinct. Just want to put that out there again.
Yeah. They abandoned the area, and this was actually without permission.
Okay.
They decided they were going to leave.
Okay.
And so I believe that protesters saw that as sort of a win, but I don't think that they realized that what had just happened was like a checkmate by the police.
Okay.
Because the police know, right, that if they have a mayor who's on their side, they have a police chief that's on their side, that they can do what they want to pretty much and not receive repercussions.
Okay.
And I think that what started to happen after that was actually crime that usually happens on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
Because this area that we're in is also, at least the last time I looked at one of the crime maps, is actually a place where some of the most violent crimes happen.
Yeah, I used to live
Seattle
here,
area.
and yeah, that's true. That's very true.
And so what the police were able to do was capitalize on that.
Mm-hmm.
And when violent crimes happened, they said, "Oh, look, we're not there, and you don't want us there. We can't make it there, and therefore you need us." But in reality, the people were just in a place where crime would have always happened anyways.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we're starting there,
mm-hmm.
I just have to point that out because I believe that then the narrative switched to something completely different.
Yeah.
And that was that somehow this area became a place where people had to come in with passports. You had, what was it, the Rolling Stone, I think, wrote an article on one of the local rappers who was actually armed.
Okay.
And called him like I can't remember the title, but they gave him some really villainous name.
Yeah.
And so it became a situation where it was no longer actually about Black lives anymore, and it was more so about it was co-opted by the media.
Okay.
It was co-opted by the media because there were people who were genuinely here
mm-hmm.
working on and establishing mutual aid, working on and establishing ways. And there were organizations. There's
mm-hmm.
the Black Artist Collective that came out of CHOP, mutual aid, both mutual aid food and books came out of CHOP. Different tribes came here and worked together. There were workshops for community members to come and listen to.
Mm-hmm.
There was violence that was being incited from the outside that I believe was intentional. People were driving their cars through. I just happened to be here one day when I just missed a car that drove through. But just before a car had driven through, the fire department chief
mm-hmm.
removed barricades that were there to protect people.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of things that happened that didn't help the fact that the media had already been villainizing the area. Now that doesn't mean that Black people were necessarily here protesting,
mm-hmm.
but that's also important to keep in mind that Seattle is
7%
7% Black people.
If that. No, definitely.
You had asked me a question though about like racial reckoning. So to go back to that, it just makes me think that if we're already starting in a place where the mayor and people are actually and the police are mm-hmm. actually refusing to recognize and work with people, and around Black lives,
mm-hmm.
And refusing to give people like Charlene Alau's family a fair, and people who don't know, Charlene Alau's was killed, how many years ago was it? I'm not sure if I remember. She was killed in her apartment complex. She was pregnant. She was somewhere around like 5'3", maybe. She suffered from bipolar disorder. She called for help. And she was then, she was holding like a knife, but she was shot by the police within a very, very short time frame. Mm-hmm. There's actually footage or recorded conversation from a police car when they pulled up where they were talking about her and how they had been there before and basically that she was like a wild one.
Gotcha.
But our city hasn't done anything to try and repair that situation, right? Same with Che Taylor, who was shot.
Manny Evans or
Emmanuel Ellis in Tacoma. Actually, the police have just been charged.
I saw that.
So in terms of when we're thinking about Black lives and the whole movement of Black lives and Black lives mattering, mm-hmm. I don't believe that the city has done very much.
Gotcha. So in context there, it seems like, definitely that they recognize that oppression happens Juneteenth, but they don't want to actually fix systematic racism, which could be reparations. Which
here could look like also in the place that we're in, right? Mm-hmm. Could look like giving the Duwamish people actual land. Could look like creating proper housing for people. To me, it's no surprise that we have like many homeless Native people.
Definitely.
Right.
it's interesting how this whole conversation ties back to your piece,
Yeah.
right? Of place and of climate and of environmental justice, which is social justice. There's just so many intersectionalities. So I really encourage the audience to try to think about that and to identify, how there's just connections in everyday life. If you just sit and you think and you try to unpack them and identify them, it can really help you to understand the systems at play that are really working with or against us. That's to be determined. Let's get to another question from online. I'll let you read it. This relates a bit to what you said earlier about policymakers and land ownership, but how do you believe global warming connects to the sense of entitlement possessed by humans?
By the rich.
By the rich, by white people, etc.
Let me see. How do you believe global warming connects to the sense of entitlement? Well, I mean, we know that large organizations who are considered people are probably the most entitled to destroying our climate and also destroying and ruining the lives of people on so many levels. But like, again, where we are seems to be a really interesting place.
Like in Seattle? In Amazon?
Because we think about Jeff Bezos and Microsoft, and we think about Boeing, Starbucks. Actually, all of those places have contributed to polluting the Duwamish River. Yeah. And refused to actually pay for lifting up and clearing out the sediment and creating a Duwamish River that is clean.
Which is indigenous land,
which
place to marginalized individuals.
Yes, and it just so happens that it's also like near places that Black and brown people live, in areas where I believe it's Beacon Hill, where some of that land is actually affected by Duwamish waters and also white centered, but don't quote me on that. But it's just something that I'm still exploring and I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, no, definitely. Would you like to read one more piece for us?
Sure.
Got about 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
Sure.
Let's see, what should I share?
Is there any audience picks?
I think my daughter loves one about her. Is there anybody else that wants to hear something?
Let's hear the one about your daughter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mom really likes
her. I can actually do this one without the book, but I'm going to read the quote at the beginning. I think mothers and daughters are meant to give birth to each other over and over. That is why our challenges to each other are so fierce. That is why when love and trust have not been too badly blemished or destroyed, the teaching and learning one from the other is so indelible and bittersweet. Alice Walker. I can look at the camera while My daughter is beautiful. And like all daughters, I hope she understands this. I hope she understands her beauty has nothing and everything to do with how many times a man glances in her direction as she passes by. I hope she sees the potential threat in letting others dictate who she resembles when she stares herself in the mirror. How long her hair, how pearly white her teeth, the measurements of her hips, bust, and waist. I'd rather she measure herself by the divinity of 21 grams, the amount of weight her soul weighs between here and eternity. My daughter has a heart. I hope that by the time she's 21, it is more than a frozen piece of meat hanging in a meat locker of a chest somewhere. I'd like to think that when she gives it, it's a little like a yoga pose. Not easy to bend into, but a slow and cautious release of the muscle. My daughter has a mind. I tell her that with it, dreams are born, and if that weren't true, I couldn't have dreamt her up. Still, she knows that some dreams are just for dreamers, and she must always stay awake. Because sadly, there are people who will try to purchase, package, and reuse her. And this is the world's game. And when I'm with her, I like to take her back to the moment that she crash coursed me into motherhood. See, at the tender age of 22, I barely had my bearings, and we grew together like two exquisite wings on the back of an eagle reaching out for our everything. My daughter is beautiful, and like all daughters, I hope she understands this.
I hope y'all are snapping too, because that was beautiful. How can our audience best support your artwork and your poetry? Mm-hmm. I think you brought along your...
I did bring my book. This is a larger version of my book. Like, this is it, and I think that's good for camera. It's called All Water Has Perfect Memory. You can actually purchase it on my website at chelseyrichandson.org. You can follow me on Instagram at Self-Love Vigilante. You can also just request that my book be delivered to like your local independent bookstore, or you can ask for it to be purchased by your local library, and that will support me as an artist.
What do you hope people take away from this conversation?
I really hope that people will use this as an opportunity to think more deeply about the way that art can be used, and the way that we as a people are all interconnected. And I really don't want people to give up on trying to make social change. So I hope that that's what people can take from this.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I'm with you on that one. It gets hard at times when you see, so much negativity on the news, constant oppression, constant harm being committed by various peoples. It's very important to continue because we have to, and it's our duty to. We've come too far as a people, and why not, right? Why not be the America that we aren't now, but we can in time? If we continue to push forward each and every day collectively, we continue to hold one another accountable, we continue to fight no matter what, because, Bloody Sunday happened in Selma, Alabama, CHOP happened here, people felt harm, people were hurt, people were killed. We owe it to those to continue to fight absolutely every single day. So I want to thank our live audience and our virtual audience for taking the time out of their day to join this conversation. I hope this has led you all to reflexive thought and self-analysis of your positionality. Sorry, I just saw the chat. Let me read another question. Thank you very much. Jump the gun. Sorry, everybody. So here we go. We know that art has the power to expand people's awareness of matter of social justice. How do you ensure the awareness is transformed into involvement of participation? Or evolvement into participation? Involvement. Okay. Yeah.
I like that this is real time.
Yeah, so real time.
Change it if they need to.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that awareness is transformed into involvement and participation? I don't know if we can ensure that, but I think that the best that we can do is hope that new awareness will awaken new ideas. That I can't remember who I heard say this the other day, but that narratives actually do change policy. When we learn and understand and see things from a different perspective, they do actually shape the way that policy is made and changed. So I think that that if people are made aware of ideas and things by way of narrative, that it's possible that they will become more involved. But I don't personally don't have any control, right, over what people choose to do. So that's a hard one. I would ask whoever asked me that the same question.
Yeah, that's a challenging one. That is very challenging. Any questions from our audience? We have a few more minutes.
We have an open discussion after we're off the air, maybe?
Yeah. There's a question over
here.
I was wondering if we could hear a little bit more about how basically the curse of climate change that was bestowed on, everyone by certain few individuals that decided to rob people from their land.
Oh man, you asked that question with 2 minutes left.
if we could,
but I love.
Yeah, I
love.
think our audience.
So one of the reasons that poem was written was to. There are many themes within this book.
Yes. One
of the themes is actually revenge.
Okay.
And I wanted to try and explore the idea of what did it look like for our earth to take revenge on us or people who are refusing to reckon with past.
Yes.
And with this particular poem, it just happened to be climate change.
Okay.
Which I do believe from many perspectives could be considered a curse.
Mm-hmm.
If people are not familiar with this idea, they could check out the most recent James Baldwin interview that was just uncovered.
Okay.
And they can think about it. Something to chew on.
Definitely. It reminded me the question was, so I can tell our virtual audience.
I just wanted to hear more about that curse that has been we gave ourselves our own kind of fate with it.
Yeah. So question is regarding the curse of climate change and how, we self-impose that upon ourselves based upon how we've interacted with the environment over time. Great answer, I might add. So I think we got it's 4:00 here on the West Coast, 7:00 on the East Coast and Central Time. It's whatever time there. Working on my stand-up. So just want to thank everybody for coming out today, here virtually or in real life, in reality, and virtually. I hope you all look for our part 4, which will be next month in July of this roundtable series on social justice through the art. Thank you, Chelsey, for being here. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, please support her book right here. And where can they find you on Instagram?
At Self-Love Vigilante, or you can just search me by my first and last name, Chelsey Richardson. Spelled with a Y.
With a Y.
Chelsey.
Thank you all, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Afternoon. Day. Bye.